He was the district attorney, the man who put monsters behind bars. But when his own wife was found brutally slain in their lavish home, the most damning clues pointed not to a random killer, but to the very man sworn to uphold the law. The morning of September 29, 2003, dawned like any other in Sheridan City's affluent Maplewood estates. Manicured lawns glistened with dew, and luxury cars sat silent in the driveways of prominent citizens. It was a portrait of suburban tranquility, a community insulated from the harsh realities of the world. But behind the closed doors of one particular home, that portrait was about to be violently torn apart. This is the case of District Attorney Daniel Peterson, a story where the lines between justice and crime, love and hate blur into a chilling tableau of deception. The initial call crackled over the police radio shortly after 8 a.m. It was a welfare check that quickly escalated into a homicide investigation. The address belonged to none other than Daniel Peterson, the newly appointed, highly respected district attorney of Maple Creek County. For the responding officers, the name alone sent a ripple of disbelief and apprehension through their ranks. This wasn't just another crime scene. This was the home of their boss's boss. At the scene, they were met by a distraught Daniel Peterson and a close friend. Daniel, a man known for his stoic courtroom demeanor, appeared shaken, his voice trembling as he recounted the morning's events. He told the officers he had left for work around 7 a.m. as usual, leaving his wife, Linda, a successful businesswoman, sleeping soundly. She didn't have an early start, so it wasn't unusual. The first inkling of trouble came via a phone call from a friend, a Mr. Liu, who was trying to reach Linda for an urgent business matter but couldn't get through. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail. Daniel, with what he described as a prosecutor's intuition, felt a prickle of unease. He tried their home landline. No answer. He called a neighbor on the third floor, asking them to knock on his door, perhaps to rouse a deeply sleeping Linda. The neighbor obliged, but the knocking was met with silence. Growing increasingly worried, Daniel left his office and rushed home with a few friends. In a cruel twist of fate, he'd forgotten his keys. They knocked, they shouted, but the house remained silent. One of Daniel's friends, agile and desperate, decided to scale a neighbor's balcony to get to theirs. He managed to cross over, but the balcony door was locked from the inside. Peering through the glass, his face went pale. He screamed. Through the window, he could see Linda Peterson lying on the bed, soaked in blood. Daniel immediately called 911. When the police finally forced the door open, they were confronted with a scene of absolute horror. The master bedroom, once a sanctuary, was now a slaughterhouse. Linda Peterson lay on her back, her face obscured by her own pink nightgown. Her chest and abdomen were riddled with vicious stab wounds. She was naked from the waist down, her eyes wide open in a final, silent scream. Her mouth had been gagged and her body bound with rope. The room was a chaotic mess, signs of a violent struggle evident everywhere. On the floor, detectives noted two distinct sets of footprints, believed to belong to a third party. They also found bloody smears and impressions from gloved hands, but crucially, no fingerprints. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found. As forensics began their meticulous work, the search of the house uncovered another layer of mystery. Tucked away, investigators found something that had no place in the home of a DA. 138 rounds of handgun ammunition. Alongside the bullets, they discovered over $100,000 in cash and stock certificates, valued at an additional $1.2 million. The discovery immediately sparked whispers and theories. This was no ordinary homicide. When questioned, Daniel Peterson had an explanation for everything. He claimed he was legally entitled to own a firearm and that the ammunition was a gift from a friend in the military. As for the staggering amount of cash and stocks, he deflected. That was Linda's world, he said. She was the businesswoman. He was just a public servant. He claimed to know nothing about the origins or specifics of her financial dealings. Given Daniel's high-profile position and his imminent promotion, the case became an instant media sensation. The public was captivated and horrified. Rumors of political revenge, of powerful enemies striking back at the city's top prosecutor spread like wildfire. The pressure to solve the case was immense. The Sheridan City Police Department formed a special task force, bringing in their best detectives to unravel the mystery. The task force began by analyzing the physical evidence. The autopsy report was brutal. Linda had been stabbed 21 times, a clear sign of overkill, of a rage that went far beyond a simple robbery. The detectives initially floated three primary theories: a robbery homicide, a sexual assault turned fatal, or a targeted assassination born from a personal grudge or revenge. The robbery theory was the first to crumble. Despite the apparent ransacking of the room, the piles of cash and valuable stocks were left untouched. The killer had lingered at the scene for at least 30 minutes, ample time to grab the valuables, yet they hadn't. This wasn't about money. The sexual assault theory also seemed unlikely. The staging of the body, naked from the waist down, with foreign pubic hair placed on her, was designed to suggest a rape. However, the medical examiner found no evidence of sexual trauma. It was a macabre piece of theater, a deliberate misdirection. With the first two theories discarded, the investigation pivoted. Detectives began to look at the man at the center of it all, Daniel Peterson. His job put him in the crosshairs of dangerous people every single day. It was entirely plausible that a criminal he had prosecuted, someone whose life he had ruined, had harbored a deep-seated hatred and sought the ultimate revenge by destroying his family. The killer could have broken in, murdered his wife, and meticulously staged the scene to cast suspicion elsewhere, to make the police chase their own tails. But the lack of a murder weapon and the absence of any witnesses left the investigation at a frustrating standstill. The trail was cold. In the weeks that followed, Daniel Peterson played the part of the grieving husband perfectly. He organized a grand, heart-wrenching memorial service for Linda, publicly weeping and pleading with the police to find the monster who had taken his wife from him. But as 2 months passed with no arrests and no new leads, a veteran detective on the task force couldn't shake a feeling of deep unease. Something was wrong. The pieces didn't fit. He decided to dig deeper, not into the criminals Daniel had put away, but into Daniel's own life. He started by re-interviewing neighbors, friends, and business associates. And that's when the carefully constructed facade of the perfect marriage began to crack. Neighbors told a different story from the one Daniel presented. They spoke of frequent, explosive arguments echoing through the walls, shouting matches that sometimes escalated into what sounded like physical altercations, disturbing the peace of the quiet, upscale community. This wasn't a happy home. A close friend of Linda's dropped another bombshell. Linda's thriving business wasn't really her own. It was Daniel's. He was the puppet master, using his power, his influence, and his extensive network of contacts to run the show from behind the scenes. Linda was merely a figurehead, her name on the paperwork. The company was a front, a sophisticated vehicle for Daniel to launder money obtained through corruption and bribery. He was living a double life, a celebrated public servant by day, a corrupt power broker by night. And the duplicity didn't end with his finances. The investigation uncovered a string of affairs. In 1996, Daniel had started a relationship with a young college graduate who worked at a local bank. Linda had found out, leading to a massive confrontation. She had hoped he would change, that the discovery would shock him back into fidelity. But it only made him bolder. He not only continued the affair, but even fathered a child with the young woman. In a truly stunning twist, it was revealed that this mistress had then introduced Daniel to her own younger sister, and he began a relationship with both siblings simultaneously. Daniel was spending a fortune maintaining his secret life, showering his mistresses with gifts and money. But the purse strings were held by Linda. She controlled the company's finances, and she was cutting him off. His frustration and resentment towards his wife had been simmering for years, reaching a boiling point. The final damning discovery was made in a safe at Linda's company office. Tucked away were 6 handwritten notebooks and over 20 letters, almost like a pre-written will. In her own words, Linda had meticulously documented every detail of Daniel's corruption, his affairs, and his abuse. It was an insurance policy, a dead man's switch. The contents of those notebooks corroborated everything her friend had told the police. Suddenly, Daniel Peterson wasn't the grieving victim. He was the prime suspect. The task force now believed Daniel had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. But presenting this to a grand jury was another matter. He was the district attorney. To accuse him of murdering his wife, they needed more than circumstantial evidence. They needed a smoking gun. The lead detective, convinced of Daniel's guilt, pushed for a complete retrial. Examination of the crime scene evidence. His team went over the bedroom with a fine-toothed comb. On the blood-soaked bedsheet, almost lost in the crimson patterns, they found it. 2 small, clean cuts in the fabric. These cuts had a distinct, curved shape, a perfect match for the entry wounds on Linda's body. For the first time, forensics had a clear profile of the murder weapon, a curved blade. They analyzed the footprints. They noticed that the 2 sets of prints only showed someone entering the room. There were no prints leading out. Furthermore, the prints were clean, not overlapping or smudged as they would be in a genuine struggle or a panicked search. They were carefully placed. A second look at the autopsy report revealed another critical detail. While Linda had been alive when the first blows were struck, there were no signs of struggle or resistance at her ligature marks. She hadn't fought against her bindings. This suggested she was unconscious or heavily incapacitated before the attack began. The detectives requested an urgent, expanded toxicology screen on Linda's blood and stomach contents. The results came back positive for a massive dose of sleeping pills. But there were no needle marks on her body, no signs she'd been forced to swallow pills, and no leftover medication at the scene. The analysis indicated the pills had been ingested several hours before her death, likely the night before. Who could have administered the drug without raising suspicion? The only person with her that night was her husband. The timeline Daniel had provided of his morning departure was now seen in a new, sinister light. He hadn't left his sleeping wife. He had left his dead wife. 108 days after Linda Peterson was found murdered, her husband, District Attorney Daniel Peterson, was arrested on suspicion of premeditated murder. In the interrogation room, the man who had broken down countless criminals sat in stony silence. He refused to speak, his face an unreadable mask. He knew the system. He knew his rights. Without a confession or a murder weapon, the case against him, while strong, was still largely circumstantial. The investigation intensified. Detectives tracked down an old classmate of Daniel's from his college days. The friend revealed that years ago, he had gifted Daniel and 3 other friends each a unique, finely crafted curved knife. Police collected the knives from the other 3 friends. When they compared the blades to the wounds on Linda's body and the cuts in the bedsheet, it was a perfect match. When police asked Daniel about his knife, he claimed he had lost it long ago. The web of evidence was now too tight to escape. Daniel Peterson, the protector of the law, was charged with the murder of his wife. As the case proceeded, the full extent of his depravity came to light. While serving as the head of the anti-corruption unit, the very definition of irony, Daniel had used his connections to secure a $4 million loan from a state bank under a false name. He funneled that money into a massive car dealership, the largest in the state, registered in his wife's name. The enterprise netted him $2 million a year, a total of over $12 million in 6 years. He was a prolific gambler with a reputation for never losing. When he ran short at the tables, he would simply make a phone call to business owners who owed him favors, demanding they deliver cash to the casino immediately. His arrogance was legendary. On one occasion, while DA, he took a taxi while in plain clothes. When the driver asked for the fare, Daniel pulled out his service weapon, pointed it at the terrified man, and snarled, "Whose money do you want? Look what I've got!" The driver, believing he was being robbed by an armed criminal, fled and immediately reported it to the police. The incident was quietly swept under the rug. Just days before the murder, at a party celebrating his upcoming promotion, Daniel had drunkenly boasted, "In Sheridan City, anyone who wants to go against me, I will not let them rest." At a class reunion, he told his former classmates, "I may not have the power to promote a county-level official, but bringing one down? That's easy." His friends said his untouchable arrogance stemmed from the protection he received from powerful figures higher up the political ladder. Finally, after a lengthy and intense interrogation, faced with the mountain of evidence against him, Daniel Peterson broke. He confessed. He told detectives the story of a love that had curdled into hate. He and Linda had married young, when he was just a high school physics teacher and she was a factory worker. They were happy. But as he climbed the ladder of power, as money and influence flooded their lives, the love withered. The arguments became more frequent, more vicious. On the night of the murder, they had attended a dinner party. Linda, feeling he had embarrassed her in front of their friends with some arrogant comments, confronted him. The fight continued all the way home. It was brutal. She used words like daggers, mocking his insecurities, his infidelities, his corruption. She knew everything, and she held it over him. After the argument, she went to take a bath. He sat in the living room, her venomous words echoing in his mind, the alcohol fueling his rage. An idea, dark and terrible, took root. He remembered a pack of 5 powerful sleeping pills he'd bought on a business trip. He crushed them and dissolved them in a glass of water. When Linda came out of the bathroom, he feigned remorse. He apologized, handed her the glass of water, and told her to get some rest. Linda, perhaps wanting to believe him, or simply too exhausted to argue, drank it all and went to bed. He waited. He sat in the living room for an hour, reading a newspaper, as the drug took hold. He checked on her. She was deeply unconscious. He called her name. No response. He said a part of him still hesitated. They had been together for over 20 years. He paced the house from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., warring with himself. But then he thought of her words, of the evidence she held, of the threat she posed to his entire world. The decision was made. Shortly after 4 a.m., he prepared his tools. He put on a pair of white gloves, retrieved the curved knife, and took a length of rope. He entered the bedroom, tied her up to prevent any sudden awakening, and then he began. He stabbed her twice in the chest. Even in her drugged stupor, a muffled cry escaped her lips. Panicked that the neighbors might hear, he grabbed a piece of clothing and gagged her. After the 4th stab, she went still. But his rage was a runaway train. He kept stabbing again and again until the bed was a sea of red. When he stopped, he saw her eyes were open, staring at him. He recoiled in horror and threw a shirt over her face. Then his prosecutor's mind took over. He began to stage the scene. He messed up the bedding to simulate a struggle. He smeared her blood with his gloved hands on drawers and cupboards. He took a pair of shoes he never wore and created the 2 sets of footprints. And for the final, grotesque touch, he removed her underwear and planted the pubic hairs he had collected from one of his mistresses. It was a calculated performance designed to create the perfect illusion of a robbery and sexual assault. Around 6 a.m., he gathered the knife, gloves, and rope into a paper bag. He drove to the old Wye River Bridge and threw the bag into the dark, flowing water. He then returned home, changed his clothes, and left for work at 7:40 a.m., ready to play the role of the shocked, grieving husband. On August 12, 2006, after a sensational trial, former District Attorney Daniel Peterson was found guilty and sentenced to death. The case was officially closed. But the story doesn't end there. During his initial sentencing, Daniel Peterson suddenly recanted his entire confession. He stood before the court and claimed he was innocent, that he had been taken to a remote motel, room 313, and tortured by investigators until he gave them the confession they wanted. He claimed fellow inmates could testify to his injuries, that a waitress at the motel had witnessed his coercion but had since disappeared. The court dismissed his claims, stating that the interrogation location was legal and that a medical examination upon his prison entry showed no signs of injury. Many questions lingered. Why would a man on the cusp of a major promotion commit such a reckless act? The motive seemed flimsy to some. Why, if he was so meticulous in staging the crime scene, did he leave the ammunition and illicit cash in the house enough to land him in prison anyway? And where did he get the foreign pubic hair on such short notice if the murder was, as he claimed, a spontaneous act of rage? The final chapter is perhaps the most unsettling. On the day of his execution, just as the sentence was to be carried out, a rumor persists that a frantic call came from a high-ranking official at the state Supreme Court ordering a stay. But the call came too late. Daniel Peterson was already gone. His body was cremated swiftly, secretly, without his family being notified. The official record states that justice was served. A killer paid the ultimate price. But the lingering doubts, the recanted confession, the rumors of a last-minute reprieve, and the hidden political forces at play leave a permanent shadow over the case. Did Daniel Peterson kill his wife? Or was he the fall guy in a much larger, darker game? It's a secret he took with him to his grave.